Hellraiser wasn't just a movie. It was a cosmic keyhole, a glimpse into a dimension of elegant suffering and repulsive glamour, wrapped in black leather and sanctified flesh. But behind the torn skin and soul-shredding hooks, it was a film born from frustration, a guerrilla art project that almost had a different name, a different sound, and a completely different hell priest. Before the cameras rolled, its creator, disgusted with Hollywood's butchering of his work, seized control with a shoestring budget and a cast of old theater friends. The icon it spawned, a figure of geometric horror, was never meant to be the star and nearly had his face hidden for good. And the world it built? It was so savage it was threatened with an X rating, forcing its director to perform delicate surgery on his own bloody creation. These are 20 weird facts about Hellraiser, a film that asks what you're willing to trade for ultimate experience, and proves that sometimes, the most terrifying visions are the ones we bring back from our own private hells. They have such sights to show you. Number 20, The Book of 1,000 Titles. Before it became the one-word title that echoed through horror history, Hellraiser went through a bizarre identity crisis. The source material was Clive Barker's own novella, The Hellbound Heart, but producers at New World Pictures felt the title sounded too much like a romance novel, fearing audiences would expect a love story instead of a descent into sadomasochistic hell. In response, Barker, with his signature dark wit, suggested an alternative, Sadomasochists from Beyond the Grave. When the studio inevitably rejected that lurid title, the search was thrown open to the cast and crew. Finally, producer Christopher Figg suggested the simple, evocative title Hellraiser, and one of horror's most iconic names was born. Number 19, The American Invasion. Although the film has a distinctly British Gothic feel, a result of being written and directed by Englishman Clive Barker and shot in London, the studio was convinced it needed an American setting to be marketable to a wider audience. This decision was made after production was already underway, leading to a strange and disorienting geographical clash. The solution was a clumsy compromise. Much of the dialogue from the British supporting cast was dubbed over by American actors, resulting in a peculiar blend of authentic British accents and awkward, out-of-place American ones. This post-production meddling explains the film's odd auditory texture and why characters in a London house sometimes sound like they're from the Midwest. Number 18, A Novella's Metamorphosis. Hellraiser is famously based on Clive Barker's 1986 novella, The Hellbound Heart, and Barker himself adapted his own work for the screen. This gave him a rare level of creative control, and the final film is remarkably faithful to its source material, with much of the dialogue lifted directly from the page. However, Barker made several key changes that significantly altered the story's dynamics. In the book, the heroic character Kirsty is not the daughter of Larry, named Rory in the book, but a lovelorn friend who harbors a secret crush on him. Furthermore, the iconic puzzle box is called the Lemarchand configuration in the novella, and Frank acquires it in Dusseldorf, not a Moroccan bazaar. These tweaks streamlined the narrative for the screen, creating a more primal family psychodrama to anchor the supernatural horror. Number 17. The Director Who Couldn't Find a Book. Disgusted by how his previous work had been adapted by other directors, particularly the 1986 film Rawhead Rex, Clive Barker was determined to direct Hellraiser himself to protect his vision. The only problem was, he had absolutely no formal training as a filmmaker. In a moment of panic before production began, Barker went to his local library to find a book on film directing, only to discover that both copies they owned were checked out. He was forced to learn on the job, relying on his instincts as a storyteller and the kindness of a forgiving cast and crew who were patient with his inexperience. Barker later admitted he had no idea what he was doing, making the film's coherent vision and lasting impact even more of a miraculous achievement. Number 16. The Unseen Face of a Horror Icon. Doug Bradley's portrayal of the lead Cenobite, later known as Pinhead, is one of horror's most legendary performances, but the actor nearly turned down the role that would define his career. When Clive Barker offered his longtime friend a choice between two parts, the lead Cenobite or one of the mattress movers, Bradley seriously considered taking the much smaller human role. His logic was simple. As a struggling actor, he wanted his actual face to be seen on screen, fearing that the heavy prosthetics would render him completely unrecognizable. He ultimately chose to become the monster, a decision that transformed him into an anonymous icon. For years after the film's release, Bradley's face was plastered on posters and magazines, yet no one knew who the man behind the pins was. Number 15. The Birth of Repulsive Glamour. The unforgettable look of the Cenobites was born from a cocktail of influences filtered through Clive Barker's unique imagination. He drew inspiration from punk fashion, the ritualistic imagery of Catholicism, and his own visits to S&M clubs in New York and Amsterdam. When briefing costume designer Jane Wildgoose, Barker provided evocative but vague instructions, asking for magnificent super butchers, and a style he termed repulsive glamour. The designs for each of the four main Cenobites, Butterball, Chatterer, the female, and the lead Cenobite, were lifted directly from their descriptions in the Hellbound Heart, creating a lineup of creatures that were as elegant as they were terrifying. Number 14, the 6-hour torture session. Bringing the lead Cenobite to life was a grueling, torturous process for actor Doug Bradley. Every day of shooting required a painstaking 6-hour makeup application to affix the prosthetic pieces and individually place each nail. The iconic grid pattern was first drawn onto a life cast of Bradley's head, with the intersections marking the placement for the pins. Special effects artist Jeff Porter executed the brilliant makeup in the first 2 films. Over the course of the franchise, Bradley became so familiar with the process that he was often credited as a makeup assistant on later sequels. His ritual for getting into character was equally intense. Once the makeup was complete, he would stare at his monstrous reflection in silence, finding the cold, calculating demon within. Number 13, the accidental name. Despite becoming one of the most recognizable names in horror, Pinhead is never once uttered in the original film. In the script, the character was simply referred to as lead Cenobite. The nickname Pinhead was coined informally by the cast and crew on set as a casual way to refer to the character. The name stuck with fans and was eventually adopted by the franchise in later sequels. However, Clive Barker has always publicly expressed his disdain for the name, finding it undignified and silly for such a regal and intelligent being. His preferred name for the character, as used in his later writing, is the Hell Priest. Number 12, the human behind the monster. While the first film presents the Cenobites as ancient, demonic entities, the sequels reveal a surprisingly human origin for their leader. Hellbound Hellraiser II establishes that Pinhead was once Captain Elliot Spencer, a British soldier who served in World War I, traumatized by the horrors he witnessed, particularly at the Battle of Passchendaele. Spencer lost his faith in humanity and sought out the Lament configuration puzzle box, desperate for new experiences beyond the limits of earthly pleasure and pain. This backstory, conceived by Bradley and Barker, added a tragic dimension to the character, reframing him not as a born demon, but as a fallen man who chose an eternity of orderly suffering. Number 11, the composer who made bowels churn. Clive Barker initially had a very different and far more radical sound in mind for Hell's orchestra. He approached the English experimental industrial group Coil to compose the film's score, claiming their music was the only sound that could make his bowels churn. Coil recorded several Nine Inch Nails-inspired tracks, creating a harsh, atmospheric soundscape for the film. However, the studio, New World Pictures, rejected their work and, in a cost-cutting measure, opted for a more traditional orchestral score. Composer Christopher Young was brought in as a replacement, and he created the lush, gothic, and now iconic waltz that defines the film's sound. Coil's rejected themes were eventually released on a compilation album, offering a glimpse of the abrasive sonic hell that might have been. Number 10, the X-rated curse. True to its transgressive themes, Hellraiser was so graphically violent and sexually suggestive that the Motion Picture Association of America, MPAA, initially slapped it with an X rating, which was commercial poison. To secure the financially necessary R rating, Clive Barker was forced to trim several of the film's most gruesome moments. The edits included shortening the initial hammer murder, removing a close-up of the hammer embedded in the victim's head, trimming the scene of Frank being torn apart by hooks, and toning down the shot of Kirsty plunging her hand into Frank's exposed guts. An entire nude murder scene involving Julia was also reshot with the actor partially clothed. This means a more brutal, uncut version of Barker's vision technically exists, locked away by the censors. Number 9, The Secret of the Box. The film's central artifact, the Lament configuration, is a masterpiece of design with a secret history. It was created by prop designer Simon Says, who imbued it with hidden symbolism. The box's dimensions, 3 inches by 3 inches by 3 inches, were chosen specifically because 3x3x3 was considered a magic number. The intricate etchings on its surface also contain hidden images and messages that go unnoticed by most viewers. In the wider lore of the franchise, the box was created in 1784 by a French toymaker named Philippe Lamarchand, who was commissioned by a wealthy occultist to create a gateway to hell. The comics expand on this, reimagining Lamarchand as a prolific serial killer who constructed his boxes from human fat and bone. Number 8, The Blind Cenobite. The physical toll of becoming a Cenobite wasn't limited to Doug Bradley. Nicholas Vince, who played the horrifying Chatterer, had to wear a one-piece mask that rendered him almost completely blind and restricted his breathing. The mask's design, with skin pulled back to expose eternally chattering teeth, meant Vince couldn't see properly. This led to an on-set accident during the scene where he confronts Kirsty, Unable to gauge the distance, Vince accidentally scraped the skin from the roof of actress Ashley Lawrence's mouth with his prosthetic fingers. Simon Bamford, who played the obese butterball Cenobite, also suffered, nearly suffocating inside his heavy foam suit. Number 7. The hand-drawn magic. With a meager budget of around $1 million, the production couldn't afford sophisticated optical effects for many of the supernatural sequences. The ethereal blue light and electrical energy that emanates from the puzzle box and accompanies the arrival of the Cenobites wasn't a high-tech effect. It was created through painstaking, old-fashioned, hand-drawn animation, with Clive Barker himself animating some of the key sequences to save money and ensure the effect matched his specific vision. This hands-on, DIY approach contributed to the film's raw, otherworldly aesthetic, proving that a powerful vision could overcome budgetary limitations. Number 6. The spinning camera test. One of the film's most dizzying and disturbing shots is the image of the skinless Frank hanging upside down from the ceiling, surrounded by chains as the camera spins wildly around him. This incredibly effective shot was never originally planned to be in the final film. It was actually the very first thing Clive Barker filmed, intended merely as a camera test to see what was possible. The resulting footage was so disorienting and nightmarish that Barker immediately decided it had to be included. The effect was punishingly real for actor Sean Chapman, who became so dizzy from being spun around that he vomited as soon as the shot was completed. Number 5. The Cockroach Wrangler. The film's gritty, squalid atmosphere was enhanced by the liberal use of creepy crawlies, but this created a unique problem for the production. Because the film was shot in England, strict laws prevented the use of male and female cockroaches on set together, due to the risk of an infestation if they escaped. To comply with the law, the production had to hire an official maggot and cockroach wrangler, whose sole job was to handle the insects and ensure only same-sex roaches were used in any given shot, painstakingly separating them to prevent any on-set breeding. Number 4. The Reluctant Villain. Andrew Robinson, famous for playing the Scorpio Killer in Dirty Harry, brought a twitchy, nervous energy to the role of Larry Cotton. However, he was deeply unhappy with the film's final act. In the original script, his character was supposed to deliver a final, poignant speech before being killed. The studio, however, decided they just wanted him dead, ordering a reshoot where his body is simply found under a bed. Robinson disliked this change so much that he refused to participate in the reshoot. As a result, the special effects team had to quickly sculpt a likeness of his head to film the new scene, meaning the final shot of the dead Larry isn't the actor at all, but a silicone replica. Number 3. The Real Actors of Horror. In an era dominated by slasher films that often cast interchangeable young actors, Clive Barker was insistent on populating his film with serious, experienced performers. He famously stated, "I'm not just taking the 12 most beautiful youths in California and murdering them. I've got real actors." He drew heavily from his past in British theater, casting friends and collaborators like Doug Bradley and Claire Higgins. This focus on performance over cheap thrills gave the film a gravitas and psychological depth that was rare in 1980s horror, grounding the outlandish supernatural horror in believable human drama. Number 2. The Resurrected Ending. The film's spectacular and explosive finale, in which Frank is torn apart by hooks and the house crumbles, was not part of the original shoot. Principal photography wrapped on a much smaller, less dramatic ending. However, when the executive producers saw the initial footage, they were so impressed with what Barker had accomplished on a shoestring budget that they gave the production more money. This new cash injection allowed Barker and his effects team, led by Bob Keane, to go back and shoot the bigger, more effects-heavy climax that the film is now famous for, adding a truly epic conclusion several weeks after the main filming had already finished. Number 1. The Future of Horror. Hellraiser was a significant commercial success, grossing over $14.5 million in the US on its tiny $1 million budget, but its cultural impact was far greater. Upon its release, it was heralded as a new and daring direction for the genre. Legendary author Stephen King, after seeing Barker's work, famously declared, "I have seen the future of horror, and his name is Clive Barker." The film launched a massive franchise of sequels, comics, and merchandise, and Pinhead became an icon on par with Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. It was a film that challenged the boundaries of mainstream horror, introducing audiences to a world of dark fantasy and philosophical terror that was intelligent, perverse, and utterly unforgettable. It didn't just have sights to show you, it had a whole new definition of damnation.